Our topic tonight, however, is American-Colombian relations. And it's our great pleasure to be joined by the Foreign Minister of Colombia. He says usually someone begins an introduction of him by joking about his age. I had no intention of joking about his age. The dignity of his position speaks for itself. He's the youngest foreign minister in the history of his country, maybe of any country. At age 36, he's the foreign minister of Colombia. His background over the past several years, however, touches all the facets of public life. He's a graduate of the University of the Andes. He's also a graduate of Johns Hopkins School of International Studies in Washington, where he received his master's degree over a decade ago. He's been active in journalism. He was an editor of El Tiempo, well-known newspaper. He's been the editor of a journal as well. He's published articles extensively and is the author or co-author of 3 books on international affairs. He's been in the academic community as a member of the faculty of the University of the Andes. And in public life, he's been a presidential advisor, deputy minister of foreign affairs, and has helped with several presidential campaigns. In addition, including serving as minister or director of communications in the successful presidential campaign of Mr. Pisano. His tasks as foreign minister are enormous. They're also very interesting. He's serving as, Colombia is serving as the president of the Non-Aligned Nations organization at this time, that being one of his international tasks. Colombia, of course, enjoys a position as a regional leader, and of course he's responsible for all of those multitude of national interests to be served for Colombia. I can't think of anyone I'd be more interested in hearing about the topic tonight of Colombian-American relations. Therefore, it's my great privilege to present to you the Foreign Minister of Colombia, Rodrigo Pardo.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Board of Trustees, and members of the Baltimore Council on Foreign Relations, ladies and gentlemen. I am pleased to have the opportunity to address the members and guests of the Baltimore Council on Foreign Affairs. I would also like to recognize the co-sponsors of the program that has taken place over the last couple of days, the University of Maryland and my alma mater, the University of the Andes, where I received such a good education as a student that they later made me a professor of political science. As many of you know, these have been a challenging times for Colombia. Even so, the last several months have underscored for ourselves and the world the strength of our political and civic institutions, the fundamental stability of our economy, the active freedom of our press, and Colombians' overwhelming commitment to democratic ideals and the rule of law. The truth is that sometimes it is difficult to communicate the challenges that Colombia faces on a day-to-day basis, whether in the fight against drugs, our struggle to end the violence within our borders, or our efforts to find markets for our bananas, flowers, and other products that are essential not only to sustaining a healthy economy, but as alternatives to the more lucrative illegal drug trade. Linkages, such as those between the 2 universities here tonight, play an important role in fostering greater understanding and stronger ties between our 2 nations. Only through cooperation will Colombia and the United States meet the challenges that increasingly confront us both. To ensure the success in the areas that concern us most, the global drug fight and the expansion of free trade and democracy throughout the Americas, Colombia and the United States must continue to be partners and allies. Unfortunately, Some events in recent weeks have strained U.S.-Colombian relations. I want to reiterate what President Samper said last week in New York. We must focus on the future. Colombia wants to end any possible tension. They divert us from the fight against drugs and our work towards free trade. Colombia wants to strengthen relations between our two countries based on a spirit of friendship, trust, and cooperation. Our partnership pays off. Over the last year, the United States and Colombia have achieved tremendous success together, particularly in the drug fight, where we have shown that real progress can be made. We were pleased to hear President Clinton refer to the strides we have made in his recent address to the United Nations 1 week ago. Tonight, I would like to report to you about some of the remarkable success we have had in Colombia over the last year, including in key areas that are important to both of our countries. Since President Samper came into office, Colombia has accomplished more in the fight against drugs than at any other time in its history. The government's integrated strategy to attack the drug cartels on all sides has got the drug traffickers in Colombia on the run and has dealt a severe blow to the narcotics trade worldwide. Many of you followed the news as we launched an unprecedented crackdown on the Cali drug cartel, effectively dismantling the world's most notorious and sophisticated criminal organization. We locked up 6 top Cali drug kingpins and put out of business the source of an estimated 80% of the cocaine that used to enter the United States. Colombia's crackdown has caused a severe imbalance in the global cocaine market. In Peru, the price of coca paste used to make cocaine has fallen tenfold. Meanwhile, the dwindling supply of cocaine has caused prices on U.S. streets to skyrocket, deterring young drug users who cannot afford the higher costs. However, Colombia does not want this victory to overshadow our other important successes in the drug fight. This year, we have destroyed more than 65,000 acres of coca and poppy crops as part of our country's most ambitious drug crop eradication program ever. We completely eliminated large-scale drug trafficking from the Caribbean island of San Andres, once an important transshipping point for drugs and weapons. We placed a new emphasis on seizing the precursor chemicals used to make drugs, aggressively shut down drug laboratories, and stepped up drug interdiction. Last June, President Samper signed Colombia's first anti-money laundering law, paving the way for a hemispheric treaty on money laundering we proposed at the December summit of the Americas in Miami. Colombia's initiative gained even more momentum following President Clinton's insistence to the United Nations that countries bring their financial systems into conformity with international money laundering standards. Colombia has said all along that it should be judged by its actions. After our first year in office, nobody should question this government's commitment to the drug fight. However, we cannot rest on the laurels of our achievements. We are already seeing drug trafficking organizations throughout the world moving in to fill the void left by the Cali cartel. Like a balloon, when you apply pressure to one area, everything simply shifts to where there is more space. As long as there is demand for drugs, there will likely be someone to supply them. That is why we must continue to look forward together in the drug fight. While we have won a critical battle, the final assault on drugs must be broad, encompassing, and global. To truly defeat the drug problem will require strengthened cooperation between every country affected by drugs and targeting each stage of the drug circuit, from cultivation to production, transportation, distribution, consumption, and money laundering. This will require leaders to make some difficult decisions at home and to harmonize their narcotics policies with those of other countries. We were very glad to hear President Clinton announce new initiatives to fight international organized crime, drug trafficking, terrorism, and the spread of weapons of mass destruction in his UN address. It represents a recognition by the United States that the end of the scourge of drugs will only come with the globalization and multilateralization of the narcotics fight. Colombia has always believed that a World Summit on Drugs would represent an important step toward this kind of enhanced international cooperation. This week, I will deliver the message to Washington that Colombia is ready now to work with the United States on multilateral initiatives. Our government has been equally successful in strengthening Colombia's economic leadership in Latin America. As you may know, Colombia has been the only country in the hemisphere that has recorded positive growth each year for the last 3 decades, fought off hyperinflation in the 1960s and 1970s, and managed its external debt during the so-called lost decade of the 1980s. Today, Colombia's economy remains solid as a rock. This year, the Colombian economy is expected to grow 5.3%, more than twice the average for all of Latin America. At the same time, the first ever cooperative effort between the government, business, labor and other key sectors has worked to rein in inflation, which in the first 3 quarters of this year has fallen to its lowest level since 1988. These trends are some of the reasons why Moody's upgraded Colombia to one of their top ratings, Baa3, showing their confidence in Colombia for investment security over the long run. We have moved full steam ahead with the process of economic liberalization that began when President Samper was Minister of Development in the government of President Gaviria. We are removing barriers to foreign investment across the board, so there's practically no sector in Colombia that is off limits to overseas investors, and so investors at home and abroad are treated equally. We have lifted import and licensing barriers to foreign trade, and we are deregulating the capital market to allow the flow of foreign funds into Colombia. We are also privatizing state-owned industries and reducing the role of the government in the economy. We have freed up banks, electric power plants, the transportation of fuels such as gas, among a number of other government-controlled enterprises. We have also sent a bill to Congress that helps ensure the transparency of the privatization process and protects the interests of the investor from government intervention and expropriation. To enhance the nation's capacity to support such growth, we are investing $27 billion over the next 5 years in cooperation with the private sector, which will contribute an estimated 38% of this amount, to improve the nation's infrastructure, including roads, railroads, and ports. As a key to this effort, we are placing particular emphasis on modernizing Colombia's telecommunications and information systems. Already, we can see the economy undergoing significant structural change. Once the mainstay of our economy, coffee now accounts for no more than 20% of Colombia's exports, perhaps even less. The increasing diversity of our exports with products such as oil, flowers, and bananas has brought even greater stability to our economy, which no longer depends on the vagaries of a single commodity. However, even as we set our sights on an even stronger global economy, the Colombian government holds the profound conviction that all our efforts must have one fundamental purpose: to improve the lives of the people of Colombia. The investments we make in infrastructure and technology, for example, will not be worth the cost if Colombians do not reap the benefits. Stability can only be assured when all citizens, wealthy and humble, have a stake in the nation's growth. That is why during President Samper's administration, investment in social areas as a measure of gross domestic product will almost double, from 4.7% during the previous administration to 8.7% over these 4 years. Easily overlooked is the fact that Colombia's success in the drug fight is very much tied to the strength of our economy and our ability to find markets for products, such as bananas, flowers, and textiles, that serve as alternatives to the narcotics trade. For example, the United States Senate has recently been considering revoking Colombia's trade benefits under the Andean Trade Preference Act because of a dispute between the Chiquita Banana Company and the European Union. For Colombia, this would put more than $3 billion in exports at a competitive disadvantage in the US market and would have a devastating effect on our economy. But for us, the consequences extend way beyond trade. Such an action would further destabilize Urabá, Colombia's main banana growing region and the site of recent guerrilla violence, and put in jeopardy the only alternative industry to drugs in that area. The Andean Trade Act was implemented under President Bush to support our region's efforts in the drug fight, particularly in drug crop eradication and substitution. It would send a discouraging message to Colombians to take away the trade benefits after we have destroyed the Cali cartel and undertaken the hemisphere's largest crop eradication program. Colombia wants to lead the way in expanding free trade and economic integration in the hemisphere. But trade must not be a one-way street. Our economic strength, diversified exports, massive oil reserves, and the best natural resource, the Colombian people, make us a natural trading partner for the United States. Sound trade policies and access to each other's markets, however, are essential to an expanding partnership. The Trade Ministerial Meeting, which Colombia will host in Cartagena next spring, will be a great opportunity to consolidate our commitment to free trade. I would hope many of you could come to this meeting next spring in Cartagena. The futures of our two countries are also linked in some less obvious ways. Last month, Colombia assumed the presidency of the non-aligned movement. We are determined to give this group of 113 diverse nations a new, more relevant role in international relations. In today's shrinking global village, the non-aligned countries must seek to be a bridge between the opportunities of the industrialized world and the needs of the developing world. President Samper is determined to also see the movement contribute thoughtfully and constructively on issues of trade, commerce, and investment. We believe this role can further cement our partnership with the United States. The next century will present a number of challenges, both new and familiar, that we must face together. Our success in confronting some of the most important issues that lie ahead will depend largely on the strength of our relations. Colombia looks forward to a stronger partnership. Thank you.
As is our custom, the floor will be open for questions until 7 o'clock.
Buenas noches. What is your feeling, and when we in the United States, when we read in the paper, all we read about are the cartels, nothing positive, drug, cocaine, blah, blah, back and forth. And the ongoing story is that you can make more money. Say you're a worker, you're a farmer, you're a peon. And if you do this, then you can make more money. What can Colombia promise these poor workers to match that attraction, although it be criminal?
Actually, since that was at a microphone, you can go ahead and answer.
Thank you. I didn't mention, because I didn't want to go into a very detail, that one of the components of President Samper's integrated strategy against drugs is a program to substitute the coca and poppy crops. It provides for giving the peasants credits and possibilities of growing different products. Of course, with subsidies from the government, and we are asking the international community to provide us some aid to this end. We have already tried in specific places. We have tried with promoting, for example, the cultivation of rubber. There is the possibility of growing bananas in some places, and there's even the possibility of growing coffee in some areas. As you know, however, the problem of Colombia, let's say the part of the drugs problem affecting Colombia has less to do with the cultivation of the coca leaves and the poppies, which mostly come from the southern nations of South America, and has more to do with the laboratories which take the coca leaves from Peru and Bolivia mainly, transform it into cocaine, and then ship it to the United States via Central America or the Caribbean or some other countries. So what we can very effectively do in order to reduce the share of Colombia in the cultivation of coca leaves is to finance the campesinos, the peasants, to produce different products. And we have already specific plans for the different regions of the country.
Would you comment upon Colombia's role in reducing the tension between Ecuador and Peru?
We have very good relations with both countries because both of them happen to be neighbors of Colombia. We have a land frontier, a land border with both of them. And also, together with Peru and Ecuador, Colombia is part of the Andean part, which is a group of 5 countries trying to integrate their economies. During the conflict, we were in a very close contact with both countries. We maintained a position of neutrality, and we favored the efforts made by a group which is part of the treaty that Peru and Ecuador signed in 1942 to define the borders between the two nations. The only intervention, the only participation of a third actor that the two parts would accept was this group, which was, as I said, included in the treaty of 1942. And therefore, what we did was to facilitate the mediating role of the 4 warrantors of the 1942 treaties, of which, by the way, the United States is a member.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a, well, this doesn't work. I have a booming voice anyway, but I thought I'd better come to the microphone. Mr. Pardo, bienvenido, lo felicito en el trabajo que tiene, que seguramente es una obra bastante grande. My question to you is twofold. In order for Colombia to reach the status that you are all striving for, there need to be invitations to investors which would come not only from the United States, but from other countries as well. Question number 1 is, what type of incentives is Colombia ready and willing to offer to investors who are interested in addressing the needs of your country? And secondly, many of these investors might possibly come with products which would require intellectual property protection. What type of protection is Colombia ready and willing to offer? And how is Colombia ready and willing to protect those interests?
Thank you. Well, regarding the first question, we have adopted changes in our legislation to promote foreign investment, which basically took out all the restrictions that used to exist to foreign investment. Nowadays, foreign capital in Colombia is treated just the same as domestic capital. There's one, perhaps one more step that we have to take, which is a reform in an old constitutional principle that has to do with the possibility of expropriation. We are changing this, and we are adopting with several countries. We are negotiating, and we have already signed some bilateral treaties for the protection of investments. The first two of them with Great Britain and I believe it's a Latin American country, are already in Congress, and the treaty with Great Britain has already gone through 3/4 of the process that has to face in Congress. We hope the government is promoting this bill to be approved by Congress before the end of the year. Then it will have to go to the Constitutional Court, and once this happens, the way will be opened for new treaties of the same kind, and it is the will of the Samper administration to sign new bilateral treaties for the protection of foreign investments. We have also received in the last 5 years significant foreign investment from European countries, especially from Great Britain, and especially in the area of oil. The British Petroleum, together with some other companies from France, like Total of France, they are the investors in the largest findings of oil in the hemisphere after the Alaska findings in the last decade. So it is the will of the government, it is the policy of the government of Colombia to promote foreign investment, and we are doing the legislative changes that are needed in order to protect foreign investments and to assure foreign investors that they can operate without risks in Colombia. And I forget the other part of the question. Intellectual property, yes. We are part of multilateral commitments to protect intellectual property in the Andean Pact, but at the same time, we are also negotiating some bilateral treaties with countries like the United States. It is one of the countries where we are undertaking a process of negotiations to protect the intellectual property under the rules and the rules of the international community.
The Johns Hopkins University and Johns Hopkins Hospital has made a public statement of offer of cooperation in any way possible between their facilities and those within Colombia.
Well, I would like to thank you this very important offer. There's a plenty number of institutions of Colombia which would be very proud to have a very close relation with such a prestigious university and hospital. And with the embassy, we can try to find the best of the different options that we have in Colombia to match this very great opportunity. Thank you very much.
We're very proud of Johns Hopkins here in Baltimore, and it certainly has a splendid reputation worldwide. And it's interesting to hear the hospital and university presented in such a generous, open, and direct fashion. And I simply think, as a Baltimorean, it's a wonderful statement. The observation was that you emphasize the importance of several crops to Colombia. The question is, what efforts are being made to diversify the Colombian economy?
Well, in fact, we have already advanced in the very important goal of diversifying our exports. As I very briefly mentioned in my address, the income coming from coffee exports used to be almost 60%, no longer than 15 or perhaps even 10 years ago. Now, coffee accounts only for 17 to 20% of our income, and this has to do with the expansion of exports in the agricultural sector, such as bananas and flowers, which I also mentioned, but also some other products. Of course, with the beginning of the exploitation of the Cusiana and Cupiagua oil fields, the energy sector is taking a very significant share in our exports. And by the mid of next year, Colombia will export 500,000 barrels of oil per day, and that will imply that the share of the energy sector in our exporting structure will also increase very significantly. In the area of manufacturing, we have had some advances in areas like the leather industry, and some small industries are benefiting from the opening of our borders with the neighboring countries. In the Andean Pact, for example, our trade with countries like Venezuela has gone up from $500 million 4 years ago to more than 2,000 in 1995. And this trade is mostly of products which are not part of the traditional exports of Colombia. We believe that these regional groups, these regional integrating efforts, are mostly a benefit to the industries that otherwise would find very difficult to export. And this gives the companies that producing non-traditional exports the opportunity of strengthening and widening their plants, and we hope that in a second phase they will be able to export not only to the Andean Pact or to Venezuela, but to other countries as well.
Would you please discuss what you see as health problems within your country and the ways in which you attempt to deal with them, and specifically the educational problems that are related to them?
Well, we have, as most developing countries and as most Latin American nations, the problems related to lack of health services and education are mostly concentrated in the poorest sectors of our populations. They are also worse in the rural areas than in the urban centers, and they are also worse in the female population than in the male population. The administration of President Samper has a program called the Network of Social Solidarity. That would be a free translation, which invests some fiscal funds into very specific programs for the lowest sectors of our population. They are basically in three areas: housing, health, and education. And as I said, they are concentrated in the poorest sectors of the poorest populations. And the goal of this strategy is to reduce the poverty line in Colombia. There is nowadays about 45% of the people in Colombia who is under the poverty line, and we hope that by the end of the 4-year term of Mr. Samper's presidency, this will go down as much as we can.
Professor Blum.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Pardo. In view of the fact that the Colombian economy has been moving along so well and consistently for such a long period, how come Colombia still has several very active guerrilla groups at a time when most of the other Latin American countries no longer have such active guerrilla groups? Could you please explain the guerrilla phenomenon in Colombia? Thank you.
Well, very frankly, I don't know if I can explain it. It's difficult to explain. And seriously, I believe that there's one single reason which explains a big part of this situation, and it is the drugs problem, because of two reasons. First, because combating drugs has diverted the efforts of the government from the guerrilla fight. And secondly, because more and more there are places in the country where the guerrilla groups are financed by participating or doing some kind of business with the drugs people. In some areas, they just the drugs producers just pay for their security. They just pay to the guerrillas, and the guerrillas don't bother them. So as a result, we have a very well-financed guerrillas in Colombia, although they no longer have a clear political meaning, just as it happens, and you mentioned it, in other Latin American countries. Colombians are no longer tolerant to the idea of the armed struggle or to the idea that there is a justification for the existence of guerrilla groups at all. On the opposite, it has become politically costly for the different administrations, and certainly for the administration of President Samper, to have a policy of a dialogue or political negotiation with the guerrilla groups, because there is a widespread opinion that guerrillas are no longer representatives of a political ideology or they don't have a political meaning, but instead they are just groups that will find very difficult to stop being guerrillas because this is a very profitable way of living. And this is not to say that the situation has no solution at all. I believe there is a solution. And in fact, I believe that if you compare the number of guerrilla groups that we have today with the number that we used to have 10 years ago, you find that there is a reduction. And there is also a reduction in the credibility and the tolerance that the society has towards the guerrilla groups. But very, very frankly, I would say that if one is to explain why there are guerrilla groups when communism no longer exists and when the country has a healthy economy, as you mentioned, and when we have tried everything. We have tried to combat the guerrilla groups. We have tried to negotiate with them. We have been successful in negotiating with some groups. But the only explanation why, despite all these facts, there are still two large guerrilla groups in Colombia, and if we would want to take only one single explanation, I would definitely mention the relation to drugs.
Would you comment upon the history of American-Colombian cooperation in law for enforcement, particularly with respect to drugs, and whatever your thoughts may be with respect to what might be done better or more fully in the future?
Well, this is certainly a crucial issue. Drugs and the crimes related to drugs, such as money laundering and some others, are by their nature transnational crimes. And that has faced our two nations, and some other countries as well, but our two nations, with a very big challenge. Because when these problems emerged, we did not have perhaps the needed legal tools to combat such a transnational type of crimes. During the last decade, Colombia and the United States signed a treaty that provided for the possibility of extraditing nationals of each country to the other country. We in Colombia extradited to the United States some of the major kingpins, as the press call them, of the Medellin cartel. However, this created in Colombia a wave of violence that caused the assassination, for example, of 3 presidential candidates, several judges and magistrates, hundreds of policemen, hundreds of judges, and in 1991, the Constituent Assembly, which adopted the new Constitution of Colombia, prohibited the extradition of nationals. We can extradite foreign people, but we can no longer, because there is a constitutional ban, extradite Colombian nationals. This has created the need to develop our internal tools to provide justice, and that has also created the need for the two countries to have other types of legal cooperation. There's one of them which is very important and has been very important over the last 5 years, which is the sharing of information about the criminals. Not only information, but also evidences. When we in Colombia capture, as we have done over the past 3 months, the big Cali bosses, we need the evidence that there is in the United States about the crimes that they have committed here in the States, and we need to bring them to Colombia in order to judge them, because we can no longer extradite them to the United States. This is, of course, a practice which is difficult because it has to do with the judicial system of the two countries, which are independent from the executive. It's also difficult because there was no very big experience in the two nations. And it's also difficult because sometimes the judges don't like to give out their information because they don't trust what the others are going to do with them. I think this is if you ask for one single issue where we can improve our cooperation, this is definitely one. We have to improve the fluency and the speed of the sharing of information and evidences against those who have been involved in the drugs business.
Yes, sir.
This Monday in a New York Times article, we talked a little bit about Colombia. There are really three things I wanted to ask. There was an accusation by some of the senior members of the Colombian government about a recent attempt on the president's life in which a bodyguard was killed or injured. The accusation was that the United States or the DEA was somehow behind that attack. And I guess I was curious to hear what would be the motivation behind that kind of allegation and where you stand with that today. The second is there are allegations that your president has did accept in the past drug money during his campaign. And thirdly, the article really focused on how money was being funneled back to Colombia through trade, if you will, and they had identified maybe a couple of hundred American companies that were knowingly or unknowingly accepting laundered money and exchanging it through trade back to Colombia, and wanted to hear your position on that as well.
Thank you. On the first question, the official position of the government is that there was no such a linkage or such a participation of DEA or any other United States agency in this attempt. There was a statement by a Colombian minister saying that there was a participation of foreign forces. He never mentioned particular ones, and he referred to information that the Colombian government had received from the United States government about an assassination attempt against President Samper in his trip to Quito, the capital of Ecuador. And this was misunderstood by some journalists as an accusation of the United States. But there were clear statements by the Colombian government denying that this was the case and denying that we have included among the hypothesis of who made this assassination attempt, that we included the hypothesis of a participation of the DEA or any other agency of the U.S. government. Regarding the accusations of the possibility that money from the Cali cartel entered into the campaign of today's President Samper, all I can say is that it is impossible to believe that you can do what we have done against the Cali cartel and that nothing happens. They did try to infiltrate the campaign. As the chairman mentioned here, I was part of that campaign and I very closely followed how this campaign was run. We adopted the severest, the most severe controls that we could think of because we knew that the Cali and other drugs cartels would want and would be interested in infiltrating our campaign, just as in the past they had already tried to infiltrate other campaigns. We adopted a code of ethics that implied very tough controls for every check and for every income during the campaign. Now, once the government, the administration started, these allegations came up, and all the president has done is to ask the judicial institutions to investigate. And we are waiting for the results of these investigations, which of course we are very confident will prove that there was no such money, there was no such financing, and that President Samper, as the candidate of the campaign, not the one who ran the campaign, had nothing to do with how this campaign was financed and how the very specific details of the campaign were run. The truth is that this is a difficult challenge, but it is a challenge that could end that could have a happy end, to put it so, because what we are proving and what we are testing is all the institutions of the Colombian system. The judges are judging, the attorneys are investigating, the journalists are covering all the events, and we hope that the result of this will be that once again we prove and we show how intolerant the Colombian society is of the drug money and everything that has to do with drugs. Now, regarding the third question, we in the administration of President Samper have received very enthusiastically the news of these measures adopted by the Clinton administration against money laundering in the United States. For a long time, we have been saying that money laundering has to be fought not only in Colombia, but in the United States and in other countries as well. The profits created by drugs is mostly created during the phase of transportation, not in the production phase. The statistics show that, and this has changed because of the crackdown of the Cali cartel, but before this, 1 kilo of cocaine leaving Colombia used to cost about $15,000, and the same kilo sold in the streets of the American cities could go up to over $160,000. So the huge profit is created not in the production itself, but in the distribution phase. And because of this reason, most of the money is not originally in Colombia, but is here or is in other countries where consumption takes place or transshipments of the drugs take place. There was an article 3 months ago in the Wall Street Journal suggesting that 75% of the money generated by the Cali cartel used to be laundered here in the United States. We also welcome President Clinton's efforts to move from the financial sector to the trade sector. During the Summit of the Americas last year, we made a proposal on a hemispheric effort to combat money laundering, and we mentioned that one of the areas where we should work was precisely economic activities different than the banking system, because it was clear that as long as more controls were adopted in the financial system, the traffickers would use other activities in order to launder their money. So this idea of going after companies that do trade and not only finance, we believe it's a very good idea, and we would welcome if this very good idea would be followed by other countries and not only by the United States.
You're being asked three questions. One about Chile's ambitions with respect to NAFTA, Bolivia's endeavors to expand her sphere of economic operation, and thirdly, the possibility of a South American trading group that might increase its leverage.
We are following very closely the process of the possible access of Chile to the North American free trade area because of two reasons. One, because Colombia would like to consider this possibility as well, and we would like to analyze and to understand the path that Chile takes in order to know what kind of a process we would have to go through. And secondly, because the Colombian and the Chilean economies are often mentioned as the two economies that have been more healthy in the hemisphere over the last years. And this has a lot to do with the policy that the two countries, Chile and Colombia, have adopted in terms of the foreign debt. We have not, as in Colombia, and in Chile also, we have not taken a very significant share of our foreign debt in short-term capitals, and therefore we are safer in the sense that something like the tequila crisis in Mexico would not happen in our countries, because our financing has not been done with capitals that can fly very easily from one day to another. So we would like very much to see Chile to be part of NAFTA, and we would like to analyze that process in order to hopefully follow a similar one in the future. Regarding Bolivia, as you know, Bolivia is also part of the Andean group, of which Colombia is a member, and perhaps the answer to this question is linked to the third one, which is the possibility of creating a free trade area in South America. Actually, we in Colombia are committed to the creation of a hemispheric free trade area. Last year in December, in the Summit of the Americas, this was one of the major issues discussed by the 34 democratically elected presidents. And one of the conclusions of the summit was that we are going to work in order to create, before the year 2005, a hemispheric free trade area. We very much share this idea, and this is so to the point that Colombia is going to host next spring in Cartagena the first meeting of foreign trade ministers, which is going to follow up on the commitments of the Summit of the Americas, the first meeting after the Denver meeting here in the United States, or actually the second one, if you will, after the Summit of Miami. What we want to do in this summit, where there's going to be a participation of the private sector, and that is why I mentioned that many of you would be very welcome to Cartagena for that occasion. What we would like to work on is precisely how to combine all the different efforts to free trade in the Americas, how to organize all the different integration efforts that until now have been done on a basis of sub-regional efforts, and how to put them all together in order to have one single free trade area in the Americas before the year 2005, as it was agreed on the Miami Summit last year.
The specific question sparked by the concern with drugs and violence, but the specific question is, what are your gun laws in Colombia?
You mean the laws that have to do with the possibility of people? Well, you see, we have increasingly adopted laws that are stricter and that make it more difficult to have a gun. But unfortunately, these laws have not been enough to stop people from being armed. I mean, it's so difficult, the situation, and it's so easy to buy weapons in the international black market that the traffickers and those who are trying to defend from the traffickers are very heavily armed, despite the efforts that we have made in order to control or prohibit the sales of weapons. I think, and your question is a very important one. I think it is crucial that the international community takes stronger measures against the possibility that the black market of weapons so easily operates in the world, and certainly in our hemisphere. Sometimes we focus too much on the nuclear weapons, which is of course something that we also want to reduce, but we have left aside the problem of conventional weapons that are still there, that are sold very easily, and that anybody who has enough money can buy virtually everywhere.
In our closing, let me wish the University of the Andes and University of Maryland College Park the best in their joint enterprises. The program has been under the auspices, I believe, of the Latin American Studies program at College Park, and I know supported by our good friends in the Office of International Affairs under Dr. Marcus Franda. As I say, a two-day conference, and I hope it's been a great success. But let me thank the foreign minister in particular for what I think has been a very cogent and as well as a comprehensive education for us, and for his fullness in answering all questions. It's been a wonderful session. We're delighted that he's given so much of his time to us, and it certainly has been an honor for us to host you this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.